All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, we will be discussing is this the fourth episode, I believe?
I think that's right.
Fourth episode of The Patient on Hulu called Company. Didn't know it was called Company until right now, by the way, but that's what it's called. And once again, written by the showrunners, Joel Field and Joseph Weisberg. I haven't been calling out the directors here. I mean, honestly, I don't even know if it is the same director on every episode, but considering that they're in a basement most of the time and then have flashbacks, there's nothing really visually distinctive about any of these episodes, but more of the same, not in a negative way, by the way. The show has its template and is doing fine. And this is indeed a different director than last week. I'm not sure why, because considering how short these episodes are and how generic, I would say, in not necessarily in a negative way, the style is, it's almost like you feel like you could get one director for all of this. And for example, once again, I'll call out the fact that we are covering House of the Dragon, the Game of Thrones prequel, in this same feed. So check out that most recent episode. And the reason I call that out is because they have used some Game of Thrones alumni directors when they have big action spectacles. And this week was about the princess kind of having a sexual awakening, and they have a female director. And I was very, very complimentary about the fact that I thought the sex scenes were handled like in a very different way than you're used to seeing in these type of films. And as a matter of fact, there's like a little featurette with the episode. And she specifically talks about how she sees sex in these shows, very unrealistically portrayed, and she wanted to have a very female perspective on it. And I give them credit because they did a really good job. All that is to say that it makes sense to have different directors for different episodes, depending on what the content is. For this specific show, I'm not sure, because they're all pretty much the same episode with, slightly different events occurring. And maybe that's my criticism of this episode. I really would just want to talk about your general opinion of the show and kind of guessing what the plot is, because I'll cover the plot here very quickly. It is pretty simple, and then I'll give you my opinions and we can have a conversation. What we see here is, obviously, we pick up from the cliffhanger from last week. Sam, this supposed serial killer, has returned with his latest captive, Elias, who is indeed a Greek restaurateur. We only hear his voice, we don't see him. Sounds like he's pretty young. He talks about living with his parents still, so it seems like it's a very young guy, which is a little surprising that this guy is so perturbed by someone who is probably younger than he is. I was assuming this was someone who is in a position of power, potentially. And that is a little surprising. And I will say that, especially early in this episode, where we see that at this point, Steve Carell's character, Alan, is experiencing PTSD or something. He's tossing and turning. He's having nightmares. We see a montage of their treatment sessions together, and we discover a little bit more about their backstory, a little more about Alan, a little bit more about Sam as well. And of course, we also have Alan, I should say, speaking to Elias through the door. And the biggest thing that happens in this episode is basically Alan tries to convince Sam that rather than killing Elias, he should go to work and follow his regular daily procedure. And we actually see him at work. And what else do we see here? We see the mom comes down at one point. That conversation continues. He does recommend by the end of the episode that Sam go visit his ex-wife, who seems to live somewhat nearby. We find out he's a big, Kenny Chesney fan for some reason.
No Shoes Nation.
No Shoes Nation. Oh, and then that's pretty much where we leave it there. And what I'll say in my general impressions here is that this episode almost, I'd say about the first half of it, I felt like, oh my God, are we achieving takeoff here? Are we achieving, exit velocity? And I felt like the plane was almost coming off the ground. And then I guess because the episodes are so short, by the end, it felt like the plane was back on the ground again, was not able to achieve any kind of liftoff. But it was very close there for a while. I felt that the Elias character, this actor, I had a lot of compassion for him, even though we don't even see him. We just hear him through the door. I did like that we flesh out a little bit more of these characters' backstories through these flashbacks. So I really did feel like this show was maybe just achieving a little bit of momentum. And then all of a sudden, I just felt like we were back down on the ground again, back on the tarmac by the end of the episode. But what was your general opinion of it?
I think I am probably more interested in Elias than I am in anyone else on the show, which is kind of ridiculous considering he's a disembodied voice at this point.
Yes.
I appreciate what you're saying about maybe the show was going to take off. I think, unfortunately, I have checked out to the point where even if it did take off, right. I have very little left in the tank as far as caring what happens here. I mean, there's some kind of baseline curiosity, but I don't think I'm gonna get sucked into this. No. I think if I were, it would have happened by now.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I'm curious, and hey, it's 20 minutes. What's the big deal?
Right.
But the absurdity of the mother here, I don't know, unless there is going to be some kind of giant revelation that makes it all make sense. I mean, what's going on? Why is the cordless phone dying? What was the relevance of that, first of all? And I mean, was it supposed to be adding some stress that the line was going to get cut off at any point?
I think it's just to create its artificial tension. Yes.
Because I didn't care. It was just annoying to me.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Steve Carell is going to be talking to the guy in the basement, right? Like everyone kind of accepts that that's happening. I mean, by the end, he unplugs the white noise machine.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you allow this situation? Why? I mean, this seems to be a big house. It probably has another place you could lock this guy up if you really didn't want them talking to each other. The mom being like,
maybe that's where the mom put her foot down. Her mom was just like, you can do this, but only in the basement.
Only the one level of the house.
That's right.
I am not giving you my
You cannot kill in my living area. Only or in the backyard. Maybe the backyard.
It's so unbelievable to me. Like, obviously, this is a show where you have to suspend your disbelief, but it's so unbelievable that it just makes me roll my eyes.
Yeah. That's where I feel like if this thing even is able to succeed, I really feel like this is kind of I'm going to keep reprimanding ourselves for covering this week to week, or my decision to do it anyway. Because, this is why I really feel like this should have been, if anything, should have been a movie. Because in a movie, you're a captive audience. You start off and you oftentimes have like a horror movie or something where the beginning is totally outlandish. And then if there is some clever reveal at the end and it all comes fitting together, you appreciate that because it doesn't make you have to suspend your disbelief for months at a time. It only requires a couple of hours, right? Like you don't have to wait until October to find out what's really going on with the mom. Like, that's literally the situation we're in when we have a 10 episode show with 20-minute episodes, which seems preposterous because it almost feels like they artificially cut this script up. Because I thought about this episode at the beginning where we see Sam going to work. And I was thinking in my mind, this is like the second act of a movie, right? So the first act of the movie would be the whole setup, and it ends on the fact that he, despite all this initial interaction, you thought where it's just going to be Alan and Sam. That's actually not the case. And now this third character's come in. He's actually going to try to make this killing. And he introduces a new character. And then in the second act, we now follow Sam out into the outer world. And now the story opens up. And then with the third act, then, things start to collapse down and we start to realize what's actually happening. It's like traditional movie structure. But by splitting this up into 20-minute increments, it's like that Quibi, failed network. I don't know if you know what Quibi is, but during the pandemic, they launched this app called Quibi, which stood for Quick Bites. And they would basically take a 1-hour movie and cut them into like 10-minute segments. And they're like kind of arbitrarily chopped up into these 10-minute segments. And I really feel like that's what this is. It's like, and it fails, in my opinion, in the same way. But like you said, I am actually way more interested at this point to know more about the Elias character. And there are some mysteries I'm curious about. Like, I think Sam's interactions at work are interesting. He feels humiliated by his boss reading a complimentary email to and he finding out that this is kind of like a template. Like they use him as a role model to the other employees. And rather than making this happy, it makes him completely stressed out, which is strange and interesting.
And they call him Mr. Efficiency, right? So he has some sort of reputation there of being like the perfect employee.
And he always brings donuts on his day, but he forgot today because he was a little flustered.
Because he's holding someone captive and two people captive in his basement.
He had a murder interrupted earlier today. He's a little frustrated. Yeah, I was going to say it's a mixed bag. It's not even a mixed bag. I feel the same way as you do, that even if this thing somehow fit together at the end, like there's a clever reveal that ties all this together, maybe as we see more and more of the backstory, it all starts to come together. Even if that's the case, like you said, I think my patience has run out, no pun intended, because at this point, it's going to be a little too late. It would still just be like, kind of like, oh, okay, I see how that works. That would be my level of appreciation at this point, right? Like, it would not be like, oh, wow. And it's shocking. I literally just read, I didn't read the whole thing, but just the headline for stuff that comes up in my Apple news feed. And literally the headline for the New York magazine is "The Patient is all killer, no filler. You got to watch this thriller." I'm like, what are you talking about?
What?
So if anything, my biggest shock is the critical acclaim for this show, which I do not know what show they're watching. Maybe because they see the whole
Wow.
thing. Maybe because they've seen the whole thing.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. And they're trying to get people on board. All that being said, this is the best episode we've had so far. It really does feel like we are starting to make progress in understanding Sam a little bit more, Alan a little bit more. Even that little velocity we got today, as soon as we're feeling like just, well, maybe we're going somewhere, it's like, okay, end of episode. I'm like, this is like a self-inflicted wound by making these episodes so short or making so many of them, right? This could be 6 or 8 short episodes and make this like a movie length, or you can make this longer episodes and fewer of them. There's 100 ways they could have made this a little more compelling for me, I think.
Agree. And I still am struggling with the casting as well. I
Sam,
feel like
right?
maybe I'd be having a better experience if Sam was more intriguing to me, but he is not.
I totally agree that the performance isn't giving me much there, but at the same time, he's playing this character that's supposed to be completely closed off, which makes sense in that regard. At the same time, I think that's also part of the way this is structured, where because you have to have 10 episodes, we're basically going to have them have these sessions for the first 3 or 4 episodes where he sits down and gives him nothing, because all the breakthroughs are going to have to come later on.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I mean, if there's going to be 10 episodes and he's going to be a wall for 8 of them, how much interest am I going to have in this character that I have like no connection to intentionally? Once again, in a movie, you can have a character that you hate and then, turn around on in the end, but that's a 2-hour commitment, not a 2-month commitment.
Yes.
Which is what this comes out to when you think about the way it's being doled out. So yeah, that's that.
So here we are.
Roger Federer just announced his retirement. Not surprising, but given his recent health. You heard it here first, everybody. Actually, not true, because by the time I publish this, it'll be old news.
Well, we did find out that Steve Carell's wife was not an angel, right? Because of this passive aggressive thing she does. So that's something.
Yeah. She, once again, another background character that is more interesting to me than the main characters. Another thing I was going to recommend to you that you might like is, do you like Aubrey Plaza?
I do. I mean, I don't have this fondness for her that some people seem to, but I like her enough.
She is in a movie that I just saw called Emily the Criminal. Have you heard about this?
I haven't.
So I think it's just available now to rent if everybody wants to watch. It was in theaters for about a month, and now it's, as usual with these things, they go to streaming pretty quickly. And I do recommend this a lot. I thought this was very, very good. She gives an exceptional performance. So if you're a fan of hers, definitely check this out. And the story is of this girl who has an assault in her background, and we don't find out about the details of that assault until very late in the show. But we find out about it in the opening scene. She basically is a college graduate. She has debts that she has to pay off, like many people could probably sympathize with. And because of this issue she had in her background, she simply can't find work. So she ends up just being a caterer or working for a caterer. She has no unionization. She's not even an employee. So that's another thing that they drive home, is kind of the working conditions for these people who are, they have a lot of debt. They have these aspirations. They grew up thinking, I can be anything I want to be. And of course, that turns out to not be the reality. And they have all this money they have to pay. And because of this conviction she has in her background, in her history, she basically can't find a job. So there's all this kind of social commentary in that. So it definitely has thriller elements, by the way. As we've been mostly covering thrillers here. There are a few very thrilling sequences in this, but mostly it's a character study. It's about this girl who was kind of raised to believe she could do anything she wanted to do. And we don't feel like she's entitled or a brat. We really feel sympathetic for this kind of impossible situation she's in. And little by little, she gets brought into a network of people who do, what do they call it? Phantom shoppers, right? Where they use fake credit cards and they get paid to make these transactions, and they give them fake IDs, etc. She does one crime and then another. And before you know it, she's in way over her head. It's really interesting. The performances are terrific. It's a small film, and I think that everybody should support it, especially if you like her. And, check it out. You can rent it right now at home, or I think it's coming to Showtime soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that. But yeah, highly recommended. Very good performances. Like I said, a couple of really, really thrilling sequences, but mostly this really interesting character study about this girl.
That sounds really interesting. I enjoyed her a lot in a completely different genre. I can't remember the exact name of the movie. It's like generic male name and generic male name need wedding dates. Did you see
Oh
that?
yes, I'm not. It's with Zac
I don't
Efron, right?
know,
And
Mike and David. I don't
yeah, I don't
know.
remember the names either. Yes, but I know who you're talking about.
Like I want to say Bill and Ted, but that's obviously not it. Mike and Dave need wedding dates.
Yes, and she's been making some very interesting choices recently. By the way, she was in Ingrid Goes West. That also is thriller adjacent.
Haven't heard of it.
Oh, it's available on Showtime. There you go. So if you guys want to see another interesting thriller adjacent movie that she's in, just from 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and it's pretty interesting. She is obsessed with someone she follows on social media, and she goes to California to basically stalk that person. And it's very interesting. It's about the film itself makes you feel very uncomfortable while you're watching it, but it's about someone who kind of presents as somewhat normal, but is not.
It's
And
not normal.
yeah, and
Isn't
it's
that all of us?
right, right. And it is a comedy, but it is a very disturbing comedy. So, but do check that out. And she gives another great performance there, very unhinged, very different than the one she gives in this other movie I was recommending. But yeah, check that out too. She's made some very interesting movies recently. All right. And for the rest of the episode, Sona, Celia and I have both watched the number one movie in the country right now, this low budget horror movie called Barbarian, which is really suspenseful. And I'll be discussing that with her in the rest of the conversation. But before we get there, I was wondering, did you have anything else you wanted to recommend or anything else you saw this week?
In keeping with many of the original recommendations I have made, I'm going to talk about something that is very, very old. I was actually just discussing it with my husband recently. And a disclaimer, I have not rewatched this movie in quite a long time, but I do remember enjoying it and thinking it was a really underrated thriller because it does not sound like it should be good. But to me, it's a really good, like seasonal, creepy type of movie for this time of year. And I think a lot of people have not seen it. It's The Skeleton Key. Have you seen that?
Oh, wow. That very long time ago. Yes.
Very old with Kate Hudson.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even remember who else is in it, but I think there are a few other pretty well-known actors in it. It takes place in, I'm not sure if it's actually New Orleans, but like somewhere, in Louisiana.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it just like establishes that atmosphere so well. And this idea of a voodoo type of religion and like different rituals that people do. And like, there's, of course, there's kind of like a twist and stuff like that. But what actually brought this to mind is, and this is very creepy and speaks to, I guess, how weird I am. When we were out on Long Island a couple of weeks ago, we have this joke about, often the Airbnbs that we find ourselves in seem like the types of places that unsuspecting people could be murdered. And this was in line with that. And so, we had a lot of jokes about how creepy certain things were. And we were talking about how perhaps the house was haunted by the ghost of a child who had passed. It gets very grim, I guess. But anyway, there was a fire pit and we were making this fire. Really lovely summer night. We're all sitting around the fire pit and someone has put this really, people have been gathering wood from the woods around the house. It was like a very wooded area. And I guess the landscapers had cleared a lot of branches, but had not actually taken them away yet. So they just had to go get them. So there was a particularly big branch that was not burning. And we were kind of saying like, that's weird that piece of wood just isn't lighting up. And for some reason, my mind went to The Skeleton Key. I won't go into the details of the plot of this movie, but somehow in the dark recesses of my mind, what I came up with is, this is very twisted, what if there's something about the tree that branch came from? Like, what if centuries ago someone was hung from that tree?
Wow. And now we can't burn it?
And now it's like somehow cursed because somebody was hung from that tree.
Or has the spirit of the person.
Yeah. And then I thought, like, where did that come from? And then I thought about, like, where have I seen people being hung in movies and like creepy things that are associated with that. And I remembered that movie and I remembered how much I enjoyed that movie.
A genre of people hanging from trees. Speaking of disturbing images, maybe this I'll cut
Yes.
this out. But speaking of disturbing moments of people hanging from trees, have you ever seen the movie with Ethan Hawke called Sinister? Have you ever seen Sinister?
I thought I saw Sinister in the movie theater with you, Victor.
We may have. We may have. That movie doesn't all hold up all the way through. It's a little cheesy in some spots, but the opening moments of that film where you see that family, the entire family being hung from a tree, like on some like old found archive film, not a spoiler considering it's literally the opening sequence of the film, is extremely disturbing, especially when you consider that it looks like, some kind of ancient found footage. So it is very, very creepy. Just maybe think of that with all this talk of hanging people from trees.
Your typical before 10 a.m.
Exactly. Hopefully no one's going to listen to this right before they go to sleep. But sleep tight, everybody. And then, of course, we'll be having the Barbarian conversation right after this, which is not going to help things either. So,
I mean, point being, the skeleton key, I'm not 100% sure it holds up, but I remember really enjoying it the few times I have watched it.
And has a pretty significant twist in it. So if you like twists, check out that one for the twist for sure. All right. Well, thank you very much. We will continue to watch The Patient. We'll try to be as patient as we can to see how it pays off. And once again, honestly, I've said this before, and I think you're going to agree with this, Sona, but if this was a drawn out 1 hour per week episode, I would be out completely on this show.
Yeah.
But as as a 20-minute commitment, okay, I'll hang in there. And hopefully all this raving that's going on will pay off. Or, maybe I'll just be one of those things where at the end of it, I'm like, I didn't get it. But next week, I will try to coordinate things with Sarah. She did want to have a conversation based on last week's episode. And I feel she's probably going to agree with it, having this be on the same page. But she did have an interesting insight as a psychologist. She has actually treated sociopaths, a couple actually.
Wait, sociopaths that were a couple or a couple of sociopaths?
Two different clients that were sociopaths.
It's like, wow, they found each other.
It's kind of romantic in the end.
Yes.
She was kind of sympathizing with the situation a lot. So it made her, she really put herself in Alan's situation and made an interesting point that Alan is disassociating when he's having these flashbacks. So as as a way to cope, she's very much reading this as the psychological state of Alan. And I thought that's an interesting read from it, especially someone who has that experience. It made me appreciate things a little bit more, but it also made me feel that if it is that specific, I don't know how it works as entertainment, but that remains to be seen. So, all right. Well, thanks for the conversation.
Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
This is 476 Barbary, right?
Yeah, I'm renting this place.
No, I booked it a month ago.
Are you sure you have the right place?
Yeah. What am I supposed to do?
Why don't you come inside and we'll call these idiots. Why don't you just crash here?
Oh, no.
I don't know if you got a great look at this neighborhood, but I don't think you should be out there by yourself. It's dry and there's a lock on the door. By the way, I'm Keith.
Tess.
You take the bedroom and I'll sleep out here on the couch.
God. Keith?
Okay, next topic is Barbarian, the #1 movie in the country. This opened well, and I think it's the second worst weekend of this year. And after the big summer movies are no longer being released, the box office has gone pretty hard downhill. But this was a pretty big hit, actually, and surprisingly, audiences liked it, critics liked it. I think it has like a 90-something%. It's very high ratings. We will do spoilers, by the way, but let's have no spoilers at the top of the review. And tell me, what did you think of this movie?
This was a fun horror movie. I thought that the acting was really good. I didn't know where it was going, which was a plus. I like that when you start out watching the movie, you're pretty convinced something's happening that
Yeah.
isn't.
Yes.
And then it changes gear.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And it basically splits in half. There's almost exactly down the middle that the movie changes genre in a way. But yes, you think you are reading what's happening in a certain way and you have expectations. That's something that's very clever about it. I agree that it is very genre literate. It's not like a movie that is, this could be a drama and then it turns into a horror movie. This is a movie that's playing with the audience's expectations, assuming they are horror movie literate. Purely, like you said, for fun. This is for fans of horror movies who know exactly what they think they're going to get, and then the movie intentionally subverts that.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. It was very creative.
Yeah, so this is the first film from a director, Zach Kreger, who also wrote the screenplay in his garage, apparently. He just sat there and tried to scare himself, and that's what he came up with. And he's somewhat famous for The Whitest Kids You Know, which was like a squad of comedians from MTV. MTV had like their own version of, not Saturday Night Live really, but these kinds of troops of comedians that were pretty popular. But that's another thing I'd say is interesting, even though he is a comedian by his career. Two things I thought are interesting is that it's really not a comic film at all early on. It kind of really does a good job with the tension. But then surprisingly, about that halfway point, when we shift gears for the first time, that there's a lot of comedy in this. And I was surprised that the comedy works almost as well as everything else does.
That part where I laughed the most, I didn't laugh throughout the whole movie. It wasn't like a comedy, but there was a few spots. But one spot was really funny. And again, it's a spoiler.
It is a spoiler. Yeah. All right.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know. I'll tell you what I thought was the funniest part of the movie. And I don't know if it's a thing you're going to say as well. I'm going to set up the premise of the film and then we'll get into spoilers after that. Okay. So the premise of the film, for those who haven't seen the trailers, and I have tried to avoid trailers for anything I plan to see. So I did not see trailers for this, although I did see the trailer after the fact. And I'm surprised that this is one of those trailers that did not give away too much. I refuse to watch trailers at this point because I have multiple times just in this past year seen movie trailers where they show you the beginning, the middle, and the end. Like literally, they show you some of the last shots in the film. And I know people who say, oh, I like to see that because as soon as the trailer's over, I forget the whole entire thing. I'm not like that. I remember everything. So when I'm watching the movie in the movie theater, the trailer, I should say, in the movie theater, I am guessing where these scenes go. And oftentimes I will simply guess the ending of the movie. And then I show up in the movie theater and the exact thing I thought, beginning, middle, and end, is exactly what I end up seeing. And I get so frustrated. So in general, I do not watch trailers, but I would say that this trailer doesn't give away too much, maybe a little too much for my taste, but still it does a pretty good job of not doing that. But the premise of the film, we meet this woman, Georgina Campbell, playing Tess, and she is in Detroit. She's a documentarian. She's there for an interview with another famous documentarian. She shows up in Airbnb, and when she gets there, she can't get inside. But then as she gets back into her car, it's raining, it's a stormy night. The light goes on inside. And when she goes, knocks on the door, someone answers the door. It turns out that the Airbnb has been double booked. And the actor who's playing this is Bill Skarsgård, who is Alexander Skarsgård's brother. And also, much more importantly, he plays Pennywise in the It movies. So, of course, once again, as far as setting up our expectations, if you are a fan of horror, this guy shows up at the door and you're like, he's got to be some kind of killer, right? So that is a very intentional casting, of course. And they have a pretty interesting conversation. She, to her credit, is very wary. She's not comfortable with the situation. And they do a pretty good job of setting up all these strange microaggressions. And I would say one of the things that I think is really well done here, and one of the themes in this film, and it leads to the most comedic moment, which I won't spoil yet, but it is how men and women basically deal with the exact same circumstance in a completely different way. Tess shows up and she's like, this could be a very threatening situation. Bill's being very kind. Oh, she's like, don't go get my bag out of the car. He goes and gets the bag out of the car. He thinks he's being a nice guy. She's like, I might not want to stay here tonight, right? So there's all these little things that are happening. And I think the film does a great job of playing out this tension from these two very different perspectives. And you can't get a read on this character, Bill Skarsgård's character, Keith, for quite some time. And they spend the first night together. We won't get into spoilers, but some strange things start to happen during that first night. And that's where I'll leave it for now. But I will just simply say that you may think you know where the story's going, but absolutely not going where you think it's going. And that is one of the pleasures of the film. So definitely don't spoil yourself on it. Go in there knowing just that. It's kind of like an Airbnb horror movie, potentially. That's what they want you to believe going in. So I'll say, you may think you know where the twist is coming, but you don't. Do you want to say anything else before we get into spoilers?
No, because everything I have to say is going to spoil something.
It's going to spoil something else. Okay. All right. So go see the movie, avoid spoilers to enjoy it fully. It's very entertaining. I don't think it's as great as everybody's saying it is. It's definitely enjoyable. And if you want like just a WTF as you're watching the movie, just being like, what? And laughing and jumping and having just a straight up fun, like Celia said, horror movie experience. And I like all different kinds of horror movie experiences, but this is one of those fun ones. Definitely go and have a blast. I saw it in a nearly empty theater. I think it's the type of movie that if you can see it in the full theater, it's way more fun. Okay, so let's jump into spoilers. Okay, so everybody, once again, warning in effect, we're going to spoil. Let's spoil in chronological order. So if you want to get a little bit spoiled versus very, very spoiled.
Hey, the laundry's still in wash. But I thought, well, I'm wide awake, so I it's gonna be a bit nut. I thought I'm gonna have some of this here wine, but I didn't want to open it before you got out of the shower because I noticed you didn't drink your tea, and well, I totally get that, by the way. I mean, you don't know me, and this is a really weird situation. It makes total sense. But I thought that, you know, you might want some of this, but if I open it while you weren't here, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, Jesus Christ. I thought you wouldn't want any if you didn't see me open it, so I waited.
I'm good.
Okay, so the first spoiler is that Tess comes back to the house the next day. She survives the night, so this does go on beyond the day. She goes out. Let me ask you this question. Tess and Keith, you know, she like lets her guard down. It's very funny that she refuses to drink, and then she finds out that this guy is actually part of this group that she may be documenting, and like they immediately cut to her having a glass of wine with him, right? So I thought that was interesting how she was like her alarm was so high, and then all of a sudden she got very relaxed around him. But I also thought that their flirtation was actually kind of sweet and genuine, right?
I thought they were cute. I'm like, they're a cute couple.
Yeah.
Too bad he's
it might work out, but no.
Gonna kill her.
Right.
You know?
And at that
he
point,
really likes her.
And at that point, what did you think at that point what the story was?
I thought, all right. I mean, this guy can't be like a secret guy who kills people because it's too obvious.
Yeah.
So they're not going to do that because that is exactly how it reads.
Yeah.
But I'm like, but that can't be it. Something else is happening. Maybe, but he's a part of it. That's what I was thinking. Yeah. He is shady in some way.
I thought it was going to be like a crime thriller. That's what I thought. At this point, once again, this movie is intentionally playing with your movie literacy. And I thought for a long time that it was going to be kind of a crime thriller. Like, for example, he might be part of some criminal pact. They might have a kidnapped victim or something. And, you know, there's always the one good guy who like almost breaks away from the pack. So I thought that he was going to be like, he starts having feelings for her. She gets caught up in this thing. And then it becomes like a thriller, like a crime thriller by the end. And honestly, that was my going in assumption. And then when she ends up returning that next day and she ends up locking herself in the basement stupidly, they once again lets her guard down after being so sharp early on. She starts being kind of dumb. And she goes downstairs, the door locks behind her, and she finds the secret passageway. And then they find that room. And once again, I was like, oh, I think I'm right on the money. This is where they keep these girls. So I thought I was still in the same camp. And then, of course, he shows up and she gives him the key so that she can come inside. And then we have once again, those kind of interesting perspective moment where you have this perspective of a man versus perspective of a woman, where she's saying the right thing. Something really crazy is happening in the basement. We got to get the hell out of this house.
I thought he was a werewolf.
Oh, wow, a werewolf.
And was chaining himself to the wall in the basement,
wow.
But didn't want her to know about it.
Wow.
And that he hadn't even rented the Airbnb. He had been living there for years, maybe, and built himself this room where he could chain himself to the wall because he was going to be a vampire. No, not a vampire, a werewolf.
I was like, wow, they're just changing that.
But, or he could have been a vampire too, because when she met him, it was dark, and when she went back, it was dark.
But he's outside though, right? When he, oh, I see. Wait, this is still when he just found. At that point, when he just found the room. You're still thinking that, right?
Yes.
Because he's out in the daylight the next. And by the way, werewolves can go out in the daylight. They just can't. They just change.
But I thought he would chain himself to the basement during full moons.
Right.
And that's what was going on out there. It's true. I'm like, is he a werewolf? Is he chaining himself to the wall? Why is there so much blood?
So then when he goes, when he doesn't take her word for it, and once again, going back to that motif of the fact that she's like, look, we got to get the hell out of here. And it's questionable as to whether he's kind of saying, oh, hold on a second. I didn't see what you were saying. This might make sense. I just want to go check it out. Okay. And they should just be walking out the door. And of course, he has to go and look. And once again, of course, we watching this think that he must be involved with this somehow for him to go down in that basement. And then she follows him down there. By the way, she's pretty smart up until this point because she like sets up that mirror so that she has light going down that hallway. So all of that is pretty well done. But then she makes a really stupid mistake, which is that she follows him down when even if he's injured, she should be calling the cops and saying like, this is happening right now at this moment. He's screaming for help. And then maybe then after that, go and explore, right? But not before. That's when they go down to the lower part, an even lower part of the basement. And that's when they discover that there is some crazy inbred lady down there and smashes Keith's head to bits.
Then I knew he wasn't in on it.
At that point, we knew he wasn't involved.
That is when I knew. I'm like,
yeah,
he's not in on this.
And that's the halfway point. So they basically take you exactly to the half of the film and basically change gears. And this is where some of the real big comedy comes from. You have Justin Long show up and play against type. He gets to play like, he has this demeanor. And apparently in real life, everybody says what a nice, sweet guy he is. And playing like a real shit here, but still very funny. And he, has a Me Too moment. He's losing representation. His whole career's falling apart. And he decides to go back to Detroit to see if he can make some money and sell off some of these properties he has, rental properties. And of course, one of them is this house in this neighborhood. By the way, the only nice house in this entire neighborhood, I guess, I can't believe that thing's still getting Airbnb'd out. That neighborhood is a disaster, like disaster.
Who is maintaining this house? The inbred girl?
No, it must be the like a property manager. He has a property manager.
Yeah, that would be the only way. But how is the inside even looking so good?
Yeah, I just can't believe it hasn't been like overrun by, the population, because like every other house there's been completely decimated, which is the case in many neighborhoods in Detroit. But this really seems to be like, not like some of the houses in the neighborhood are completely collapsing and unmaintained. It's like, this is the only nice house in the entire neighborhood. It's a little questionable.
They must never rent it out because they double booked her in this guy.
Well, I think, this is actually something that does happen sometimes. She went through Airbnb and he went through VRBO. So he's using two different websites, which often is the case. So, there's just a mistake where the calendars didn't synchronize. So it is something that does happen. So it's not uncommon, actually. This can happen.
So the funniest part, he is such a narcissist. He's such a jerk.
Yes.
You cannot sympathize with him. There comes a point where his honor becomes questionable.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And I just assume he did this thing.
Yes.
But in a way that like even he didn't think was a big deal because he's such a jerk.
Right.
He is so funny. So when he gets captured, and she's like,
Before we get there, I want to say that my funniest part in the whole film does revolve around Justin Long, but it comes before then, which is that once again, seeing things in completely different ways. She sees that downstairs and she's like, nope, no way. I'm not even going in there. Right. And then, little by little, she does start to explore. But his perspective is hilarious, where he sees the rope, he pulls it, and then the trap door opens up and he finds that extra room. And you immediately see him on the internet Googling whether you can claim that, extra footage, housing footage on your listing. And he's just like, oh my God, my house is so much bigger than I thought. He's like so excited.
He is like so delusional.
Yes. And then he goes to that lower part He's got the
He doesn't
cages and stuff around.
question.
He's got
What did he
cages and
think
stuff.
that I was doing there?
Exactly. When he gets into like underground labyrinth, like what the hell does he think is going on there?
Did he think it was like there forever and he just never noticed?
Exactly.
That's
And
what
he's
I
just
think he
measuring
must
it.
think.
He's like, ooh, look, 9 feet.
Like, oh, I didn't know this was here when I bought this house.
Yeah, he's like, oh my God, look at all this extra space I have.
It's so crazy. When he was
Hilarious.
on a computer Googling that, I'm like,
Yes.
what is he still doing in that house?
Right.
I would have like been standing outside in horror, driving
He's
away,
excited.
calling
He's
for
excited.
help.
He's excited by this. Oh, that was the funniest. I was laughing out loud at that.
I thought it was funny when they were in the pit
Yes.
and
the milk.
she was trying to feed them.
Yes.
And what is that actress's name? She's like, you don't understand.
Don't get mad.
You don't understand.
Don't freak out. She'll freak out.
Like, don't get upset. And he is so confused and he cannot drink that. But she does.
Oh, yeah, that's how she survived.
So gross. It's got like hair on it.
Yeah, so gross.
So gross.
And it just like jiggles when she like moves her hand back and forth.
It's so gross.
There's something
it's
extra
like
gross about it.
old plastic.
It's so old. Exactly. It's been down there for decades.
It looks like a condom.
Exactly. Exactly.
Like there's like this wiggly thing.
Yes. It's so gross. Yes. And then of course he doesn't drink from the bottle and she's just like, well, there's another way I could feed you.
And it's like monster breast milk.
Yes. Yes.
Ew.
Right from the tap. That's why she learned. She's just like, I'll drink it from the bottle. It's better than the other thing.
That is so disgusting. But that was funny. He's just like, no way. But his face.
Yes. Yes. He's great. And then we flash back 40 years and we find out, this is during the, before the white flight from Detroit, basically after integration, that people started to move out of these neighborhoods. And we can tell it's the 80s because of they talk about Reagan on the radio. And we also see very nice production design. We see the same neighborhood, but of course, everything rebuilt and new and fresh. But of course, the person who lives in that house is a creeper who is kidnapping women and having sex with them in the basement and recording it and having these children. Is really disgusting, this whole situation. One more crazy twist in this whole entire movie.
Yeah, and he's still alive.
Yeah, he's still alive, and he's down there, and his daughter is down there. This is like the daughter
Or
of
his granddaughter.
Well, I mean, she so the mom is no longer around. Obviously, she gave birth.
They said they would give birth,
right.
And then he would then have them give birth again.
Yeah, the homeless guy in the neighborhood basically describes this as multi-generational incest here. Although it's question, I mean, it's possible. I'm just wondering what generation basically this mother is. And the mother's so creepy. She's like, Baba.
Gross. You already had someone when we go back. So
yes.
If he started when he was 25, then
they might have been down there. That's a good point. I was thinking
45,
like this.
55. Yeah, he could have been doing this for years.
I was taking it too literally, where it was, for example, we flashed back about 40 years and I'm like, is this woman 40 years old? Like it's the baby from that time. But I see what you're saying. Like if this was going on for a while, then that means that he already had like this maybe multi-generation brood down there of these creatures. And, he's just making more of them, right?
And this is what you get.
Yes.
When you inbreed like 4 times.
Right. And now the movie becomes like, The Hills Have Eyes or something is one of these like, mutated, not cannibals, I guess, but these mutated people movies. So yet another genre that we slip into and did not see that one coming at all. Like not in the slightest.
In the end, you're still sad because it's not her fault.
Oh, of course.
That she is such a monster.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of sad. Bang, bang, right? So it's kind of a sad twist there at the end. Yeah, so for anybody who's watching this without watching the movie, basically at the end, they make it out of the house, Justin Long and Tess, or AJ is the character Justin Long plays. He did run into the father, this like grandfather, great-grandfather, what is this guy at this point, who's killed himself when he finds out that AJ tells him that the cops are on the way, which of course is not true. The cops don't even want to intercede. They think that Tess, who broke out of the house, by the way, very sadly, breaks out of the house, tries to get the cops' attention. And they're like, she's just some crack addict. Like, I'm going to make you sleep this off at the police station because she looks like a mess, obviously. She's been living down there for weeks at this point, drinking this gross breast milk. It's her only sustenance, probably.
She's so greasy. Her hair's matted.
Exactly.
She's like probably covered in feces.
Exactly. And then AJ, having found the dad, also finds the gun, and they eventually separately have escaped, and they bust out of there. She's actually driven her car. She had her keys with her, car keys with her, drives the car and runs down the mother character, this giant mutant lady. Then AJ escapes as well, comes back to help him. She actually comes to rescue him, and he accidentally shoots her. She's has a pretty bad wound, actually, so he thinks she might die. And so they bust out of there. That homeless guy who saw him as a threat earlier actually turns out to be trying to help him out. Says, "Come stay with me." Another funny scene in the movie, by the way, is that he's like, "Come stay with me. If you stay here, you'll be safe. I've lived here my whole entire life, and she's never come and gotten me. So if we just stay here, we'll be fine." And that second, she like busts in and like kills him.
Yeah, because she only comes out at night. You know what was funny too? When the first homeless guy was like, "Don't go in there."
Yes. It's the same guy. Yeah. Don't go in there, little girl.
No, I thought it was a different guy.
No, same guy. He just, warned her the first time, and then, he pulls her out the second time.
So threatening. Don't go in there.
Don't go in there yet. Once again, be clear in your language, by the way. Be like, there's something crazy in that house. You need to get out there. You're in danger. Don't be like, don't go in there, little girl. Just sounds a threat. Just sounds threatening. Yeah, so then AJ and her are trying to escape. They're riding up this abandoned silo, which is where this homeless guy lives. And they get to the top, and AJ kind of has a moment of like, well, am I really a bad guy? I don't think I'm a bad guy, but maybe I did hurt that. Maybe I need to pay some consequences. And you think this is going to be a redemption moment for him. And he's just like, I could get away if I throw you off here. He shoves her off the silo and is just like, go get your baby to the mother character. And she does.
She loves her.
She does. She jumps and tries to rescue her. And it looks like they're both dead, but they both survive because the mother, like, literally put herself, under her. So she broke her fall, although she's still badly injured. He goes down, and that's another very funny scene, by the way. I mean, Justin Long doing great comedy work here. He's like, oh my God, I saw you slipping. I tried to grab your hand. Him trying to talk himself out of like how he was actually trying to help her, but he shoved her off the roof. Is hilarious. But Mama knows he's lying, and she sticks her nasty nails right into his eyeballs and and then like basically destroys his head. Completely smushes his head.
What kind of life could she have had though if she stayed with her new mommy, because she loved her so much?
Yes. Yeah, she wants to go back with her. And
she could have tamed her and like turned her into kind of like a pet.
She could have brought her upstairs and given her a shower and combed her hair at least.
No, I mean, the kidnapped woman should have.
Oh, had her quality of life down there? They could go out and hunt together at night, maybe eat mice or something.
No, but she could have turned her. She could have been like, okay, she wants me to be her baby, and I'm just going to train her like you would a lion.
Yeah,
she could be a lion tamer.
She's going to call. She has her cell phone. Now that she's back, she can grab her cell phone. She's going to get that documentary crew there, and she's going to get rich making a documentary about this inbred family down in the basement.
Not just that, she could drag the mama around like you would a dog on a leash. Like, come here, mama. Come here, mama. And she would like trample over, you know, and just be like looking at people dressed weird, all gross.
That could be like one of those Walter Hauser stories or something, like, Raised by Wolves. It's like, she would be one of the most famous people. She'd be doing Oprah, Baba.
That's,
Baba.
I like to think, on the bright side of stuff. So if this happened to me, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to tame her.
Right.
She loves me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna turn this into, I'm going to train this bear. And then this bear is going to do anything for me, or this lion will do anything I say.
Exactly.
Anything.
Exactly.
In the real world.
That's right.
We didn't have to kill her.
Yeah.
Did she have to die? I feel bad that she died. I feel like it was a waste.
Yeah. Mother could have survived that. She could have.
With the right training, she could have survived out there in the world.
All right. And maybe this will be set up that next conversation we have about that other movie, which we won't bring up yet. Oftentimes people talk about horror and thrillers. And what I think is interesting, I never thought about this until very recently. I was reading an article, Anne Radcliffe, which was one of the first Gothic poets of 19th century. She was part of that romantic movement of the Gothics that really led to the whole genre of horror, right? So what I found interesting is that she described the difference between terror and horror. With terror, she said that terror was the anticipation of something bad happening, but that terror was, so let's make that analogy to thrillers or suspense movies, that it was like something that opened your senses up. And she thought horror was cheap because what it was is it presented you with that thing you were afraid of seeing. And in presenting it to you, it was like nihilistic. It wasn't like opening up possibilities of like what is coming around the corner, what's coming after me, activating your imagination. By presenting you with something, by horrifying you, it had basically nullified any of that imagination. And as a matter of fact, it was almost like a nihilistic act. So she was very anti-horror. Not that we have to use that as a frame, but I did think it was interesting because I think she's touching on something which is legitimately true, the difference between suspense and horror. Because oftentimes I'll ask people, hey, do you want to talk about a horror movie? And so many people tell me I don't like horror movies, but they like thrillers. They like suspenseful movies, but they do not like horror or what they define as horror. Another thing I find very interesting about talking about horror is how everybody has a different definition of horror. Like, for example, people want fun horror like this one, right? And I'm not a huge fan of fun horror, although I enjoy it, but I don't put it at the top of my list. And then I like transgressive horror, a film that almost is like showing me something I don't want to necessarily see. And I think only horror can really do that as a genre. But then I don't know who I'll recommend that movie to other than you, maybe, because most people will be like, why did you make me watch that? Like, they're completely traumatized by it.
It's so disturbing.
Right. And then, but that's what I think is interesting. Everybody has a different definition of horror. So it's very hard to get a film, like, for example, Malignant is a horror movie, and some people love that, and some people hate that movie because it's so campy. And then, the movie, like The Exorcist, for example, is maybe one of the few films where you kind of have that consensus, because do you like jump scares? You get jump scares. Do you like, one thing that I really like about horror movies is that it takes a very strong technical director to be able to pull off a horror movie. It's one of the most well-crafted movies of all times, The Exorcist I'm talking about, right? So it checks all those boxes. Like, are you looking for this? You got it. Are you looking for this? You got it. Do you like supernatural horror? You got it, right? It's like, it's all in there. But most of the time people are unhappy with that. You have a movie like The Strangers and they're like, it's not supernatural. Or, you have a movie that's very serious, like you watch Hereditary or something, and people be like, it doesn't have enough jump scares. And I'm like, okay, jump scares don't mean horror movies, right? Circling around. What's your definition of a horror movie?
For me, a horror movie is not wanting to see what's coming next, like being horrified at what's coming next, and that slow build of anxiety and dread. Every new scene becomes like probably the scene, because now you're getting closer to the end of the movie. And also quiet scenes where nothing's happening gives me a sense of dread also, because I feel like something's about to happen. So to me, a horror movie is what my imagination is doing during this horror movie before I even get to the worst part. And the movies I like, I can't hate them. I like them, but I don't know if I felt very uncomfortable watching them, and I won't recommend them to other people.
Right.
Like, I like those movies because I felt something very intensely for a really long time.
Right.
Consistently, that's a horror movie for me. To me, a horror movie is not like, laugh, 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 jump scare.
Yeah.
Oh, gross. That's, to me, that's, I don't know what that is. That's not my thing.
Right.
So I don't watch a lot of that. But that is way more enjoyable than what I described as a horror movie. Right. You don't want to be disturbed, do you? Like, why do people watch horror movies? So are they watching horror movies because they want to feel something intensely and they want to be uncomfortable and scared and turned off? Or do they want to see a horror movie because something scary will happen and then it nullifies it a little? It somehow makes things less scary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the point of the jump scare is, right? Is to, like, turn it into a joke almost. And that there was like a whole genre of movies, after Scream, which is excellent. But after that, there was kind of like the slasher film became more prevalent again. There were a bunch of like PG-13 even movies that came out, and they were just like jump scare, jump scare, jump scare. And the whole purpose was to like be in a movie theater and just be waiting for the next jump scare. A movie that's just nothing but loud noises to make you jump is like, that is not horror. Like, horror needs to be more than that. I mean, those are horror movies, right? Because oftentimes they have something horrific in them, but I just felt like, horror could be so much more than that. And for me, I really like horror films that allow you to play with ideas that you really can't play with in any other genre of movie, right? Like that's why I think Hereditary, for example, became such a famous film and was so effective, because it is all about this trauma of this family and maybe a bunch of mentally ill people, right? And the metaphor of that is you can read it as being that this supernatural curse that they have on them is this depression or whatever mental illness they have, and it just goes from generation to generation, and they're all afraid of having it. And then at the end, of course, speak to your point, it all turns out all that crazy shit is all true, people. It's all friggin' true, right? And it's that's why the ending's so disturbing as well. But honestly, the most disturbing parts of that movie are just the scenes where she admits, spoilers for Hereditary, everybody, where she admits that she tried to like burn them, and he remembers it too, and it's like this scar that they have between the mother and the son, right? So it's like it's such a traumatic film, but it allows you to talk about, if you have a movie where people are just talking about mental illness or something, you probably wouldn't be allowed to make a popular film about it, but you put it in the context of a horror film and all of a sudden it's very popular, right? So I think that's what's kind of interesting about the genre in general.
What do you like besides that? Like, do you prefer really like intense horror movies where it's just like, oh my God, I don't know if I could watch this? Do you like those?
It's yes and no. Like for me, David Lynch is my favorite director, so I like the psychological fear of that. Like for me, the most horrific thing is when you can't trust your own sanity, basically, right? And that's what Lynch puts you in that headspace, which I think is incredible. And then, I also do like another one of my favorite directors is David Cronenberg. And I really like the body horror thing too, where like your body betrays you. So those are two things, very loosely, but like The Thing, which is not a David Cronenberg movie, that's John Carpenter, but another great film because of the same thing, where it's like you can't trust your own body, you can't trust who's around you. They may not even know that they're this thing or not. So that kind of paranoia about your own mental state, or your own body, you're betraying you, right, is really powerful for me. And I think those are the ones that I really like the most. But I can't say that that is a genre of movie, but it doesn't always work. They're not always good. Although those two directors are much better at doing it than basically anybody else. But those are probably my favorites. But I do like almost like the history of horror. I like all of these different genres. So I do find like The Evil Dead, right? Which is not even a horror movie in my opinion. It's like a comedy, really. But I do like Sam Raimi's over the top style, and that Evil Dead 2 is hilarious and gruesome at the same time. Peter Jackson's Australian films like Dead Alive, so, before he did the Lord of the Rings films, Dead Alive is right in vein of Evil Dead, for example, or Malignant, a recent kind of over the top, crazy, very entertaining horror film. I can enjoy those, but I don't even consider them horror. I mean, that's almost playing with horror conventions and then making a comedy or an action movie or something else, which I enjoy. I enjoy because I just a general fan of horror. But for me, the ones that like stick with me are, like I said before, like the more psychological ones, or these ones where you can't trust your own experience of the world, which is the most disturbing thing to me. That's why I watched like The Father, the movie with Anthony Hopkins about him having dementia, and how every time he walks into another room, he's like seeing different people. He's in a different context because he's in his own mind, his own deteriorating mind. And for me, that is a straight up horror movie. Like that is maybe the most horrific thing I've ever seen, because people are actually dealing with that every single day, which is a nightmare when you think about it, for real.
Yeah, psychological is definitely my most uncomfortable to watch horror movies. I don't know why I feel so uncomfortable though watching these movies, yet I am addicted to these movies. Speaking of mental disorders.
Well, for me, I think it goes back to what you said earlier. I just like something that makes me feel something, even if it's something I don't agree with necessarily, or I, seek out on a day-to-day basis. I just like having like a visceral experience. So for example, I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is not a horror movie at all. So it was such a life-affirming, beautiful, incredible movie. And unfortunately, I don't have those experiences with those type of films all the time. Oftentimes there'll be films that are trying to do that, trying to be uplifting or whatever. And I just feel they're manipulative and they don't make me feel anything. I can appreciate what they're doing. I can appreciate why other people have those emotional reactions, but I don't have an emotional reaction to it. So it's the rare thing, as opposed to, with horror movies, Actually, I take that back too, because most horror movies, most popular ones, are trying to have an effect on me, and I rarely have that experience. To be totally honest, with Barbarian, even my main reaction to Barbarian that made me recommend it, that would make me recommend it, wasn't the structure of the film or whatever. I actually thought when they changed gears, it was a little disappointing for me. But my greatest appreciation of it was I have no idea what's going to happen in the next scene, and good for you. Like I am like the most jaded film goer. Like I always know exactly what's going to happen. Within 10 minutes of a movie starting, I had no idea what's going to happen in this movie. I'll give it kudos for that for sure. So
I thought it was fun.
Yeah, it is.
I
fun.
think if you want to go out and not take yourself too seriously,
yeah,
and even for teenagers,
yeah, absolutely. Oh, this is
Like,
definitely,
I
this
could
is a date
take
night.
the
This is a date
kids
night
to
movie.
this.
Yes, this is a date night movie. Yeah, yeah. This is fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's
This is-
cool.
Right.
Like it's a
Oh, yeah.
cool movie to watch.
Yeah. And it is a horror movie. Like there are moments of it, like especially when you think about the backstory for this poor character, this mother character, there is true horror in there, like real life horror that they're dealing with, but it doesn't keep it from being a fun movie. So I think that in that way, it's definitely a cut above. I just don't think it's like, exceptional. I don't think I'll remember this movie in 5 months. I doubt I'll remember I even saw it, but it was a lot of fun to watch. And like I said, I saw it in an empty theater. I think if I'd seen this in a packed theater, it would have been way more fun. Anyway, I'll send you some links of stuff you might want to catch up on. And then we will decide not only what we'll discuss next, but like when we're going to have it in there, because we're going to be talking about House of the Dragon over the weekend on Sunday or Monday. We are going to be talking, I'm going to talk to Sona about The Patient and Do Revenge, by the way. You may want to watch that. And entertaining like Heather's crossed with Strangers on a Train. That's literally what it is, with Mia Hawke, the Ethan Hawke's daughter, in it. And it's supposed to be like a comedy thriller, and it's supposed to be good. It's on Netflix as of today. So we're going to be talking about that next week. And also have Ray and Nick coming on the show to talk about the first 2 episodes of the new Star Wars show, Andor, which is actually supposed to be good. I haven't liked any of these Star Wars shows. This one's supposed to be good. So that will be next week. And I don't know, maybe we'll have to put in a 4th episode. I don't know. I don't think that's possible. Four episodes in a week. Maybe we'll have to push it out to the following week, but we'll get around to it. Anyway, I'll send you some stuff to watch, and hopefully give you lots of nightmares.
Yep. It's good.
All right.
The Handmaiden has come back.
Yes,
that's been
true.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I can't talk to you about that because you are never going to catch up.
I am so far behind.
Wow, you should though. So good. All right, enough about that.
We should get into that once the season gets going. You can just review it on your own, but we will save that till there's more episodes available.
Okay.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.